This is Pod Populi.
Podcast for the people.
The Great Love Debate. It's the Great Love Debate.
The Great Love Debate. It's the Great Love Debate.
Hi again, everyone. It's Brian Howie. Welcome to the Great Love Debate, the world's #1 dating and relationship podcast since 2015. We don't talk about sex that much on this podcast. Somebody pointed that out to me the other day. They were surprised. They were like, "Oh, you have that sex podcast." I'm like, "Not really. Not really. We don't always get into sex. And we certainly don't always get into it in a very in-depth fashion." And people are kind of surprised at that. And I think that when somebody pointed that out, it's not just an astute observation, but it's also a reasonably fair criticism. We really don't go there other than the occasional funny anecdote or maybe the fleeting mention. And we really should talk about it more for selfish reasons, because when we do, it is almost some of our highest rated shows. If little tip out there, if you're a podcaster, put the word sex in your show episode title and you're going to get a lot more listens. Sex, as always, does sell. So you're probably wondering, well, why don't you? Why don't you talk more about sex? Because this show and everything when it comes to the subject matter of love and dating and partnership and relationships and all that, as we have said over and over and over, always comes down to confidence and communication. So it probably falls on me. So it's probably my fault. It's my show because, like many of you, I'm not always confident bringing it up and communicating about it. I sometimes think it's just too personal and there's too many different flavors and I'm always worried about offending somebody. And it's hard to take a deep dive on it without leaving a big portion of the audience on the sidelines. I brought up sex fairly in-depthly at a live show we did way back when in Indianapolis. And some woman came up to me and she made some comment like, "This is the Bible Belt and you shouldn't speak that way." And I'm like, "None of us are virgins here." And she's like, "Speak for yourself." And she got all mad. And that was very early on in our tour. And that kind of intimidated me. We actually tried to do it twice more in our live show, more sort of highly sexualized version of it. One time we did it in LA and we had Sex with Emily host, Emily Morse, who's fantastic. She was on our stage. Dr. Drew was on our stage. And we gave it a shot, and it was sort of okay. And then one time, maybe 2 years ago in New York City, we had a bunch of cast members of the Bravo show Summer House on the stage, and all they have is sex, I think. So we tried to go down a more heavily sexualized route, and some of the audience in New York loved it, and some audience felt left out. But why did they feel left out? I don't think it's because the subject matter didn't have relevance or that it wasn't helpful. It definitely was entertaining. I think it was simply because they weren't used to having those conversations, and they felt uncomfortable simply because of the unfamiliarity with that, and maybe because it was in public. And, you know, it wasn't like the show was bringing up anything that they didn't do or didn't like. It's just that we were bringing things up that weren't being discussed, not openly, and certainly not honestly. So, well, that all is going to change today. Changing it today, because I have someone here joining me who is all about sex. Ladies and gentlemen, Madonna. No, I'm kidding. Actually, she's not just about sex. She's more about sexual health and wellness, which is about so much more than just the physical. She's a board-certified physician. She's the founder of Bawa Medical. And most importantly, she's the host of the brand new Dr. Sex Fairy podcast. We brought in the Sex Fairy herself, Dr. Kanwal Bawa. How are you?
Hello. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I think your lady in Indianapolis would hate me.
Why don't we have these conversations?
Because they make us uncomfortable.
They make us, I know, it's something that people think about a lot. It's things that we obsess over. It's certainly things that we aspire to. Yet talking about it out loud outside of the context of a handful of people, and usually those handful of people are not our most intimate partner, it does make us uncomfortable.
Everybody's doing it. Not everybody wants to talk about it.
Not everybody wants to cop doing it. I want to start a little bit with your story because I'm familiar with it, because I think it's fascinating. What is a nice Indian girl like you doing in a sexualized field like this? How does that happen?
I know, what a bad girl. India's disowning me right now.
That's
Though
right.
We do have a few billion people running around. Clearly
Somebody's doing something, right?
Yeah, we made the Kama Sutra. We're having sex.
That's true.
We don't always talk about it, though.
The Kama Sutra stems from what?
Lots of sex.
But it's a
Well,
Hindu
I don't know. That
writing?
It's a
Do you know the
Hindu
history of
writing.
the?
Frankly, no. How terrible is that?
I don't know, but I don't know what we know what the Kama
It's,
Sutra
you know,
is.
all the different positions. and
Right, but
it
it
came
com-
out of us Indian
But
people that
it's so
don't like
Indian
talking
people. It
about
did derive from Indian. It
yeah.
wasn't just assigned an Indian name.
No, that's Indian.
Right. You got to this. I know your story. You're working in emergency rooms, and sometimes people showed up at the emergency room for things that were not necessarily knife wounds.
I know, and it was so annoying. I was there to get bullets out of chests. I was there to do all kinds of exciting things, yet here I was. Well, I guess these were exciting things too, just not to me. I was having men come in with vibrators still vibrating in their butts because their girlfriend lost the string. I didn't know sex toys came with strings.
I didn't know that either.
Lots of exciting things like that, from catching babies to fishing vibrators out of butts. I've done it all. That's how it began.
And people are obviously embarrassed if it's of sexual nature.
My patients were absolutely mortified 100% of the time. I got excuses such as, well, I just kind of fell on it. And I looked at them and I thought, now this is getting ridiculous, because I was, a lot of things. Stupid wasn't one of them.
Right.
But yeah, they just accidentally fell on sex toys that then got embedded inside.
But then you realize somewhere along the line that because people are having medical emergencies, but also some difficulties, that you realize that people aren't not only not getting, they're getting in a lot of trouble in their sexual lives. They're certainly not getting the most positive experiences out of it. Is that fair to say?
That's very fair to say. In fact, while it was initially annoying, eventually it became enlightening, because when it happened often enough, I was forced to ask myself the question of what was actually going on, what was going wrong in their lives, that they were ending up, characters on Sex Took Me to the ER or whatever that show is called. Every bit of that's true,
Any Viagra OD? Can you OD on Viagra? Can you die from too much
Yes,
Viagra?
you absolutely can.
Oh, you can die?
Oh, yeah.
From a heart attack or from blood
It'll
diversion?
drop your blood pressure so much you'll just keel over. That'll be the end of that. Sex won't be your biggest problem then.
I think Viagra changed a lot of things.
It
I
did.
think it brought a lot of older men and subsequently women back into the game where maybe they'd been out of things for a decade or more.
Absolutely. Syphilis is on the rise in nursing homes. Who knew?
It is?
Absolutely.
Because they're carrying around stuff from the war that never came out of their system, and now it's back again. Syphilis, old-fashioned syphilis.
Good old syphilis.
And so they're suddenly perking up their frisky again. They're getting a second wind, for lack of a better term.
They have lots of time, and they have stiff penises now, so they're making good use of them.
Is that dangerous to suddenly be erect after 15 years off? Can the body adapt?
The body can be surprisingly good at adapting, but the problem is
Like
that
riding a bike?
sometimes, I guess so. I never thought of it that way, Brian, but that's a good way of putting it, like riding a bike. But the thing is that sometimes it may work too well, and that erection doesn't go away. Initially, they think that's the best thing that ever happened to them. Then they realize that's a problem.
So the after 4 hours, please consult a physician. That's a legitimate medical
That's a legitimate
condition.
condition, yes.
Yeah.
It's
How do
not
you
a
get
badge of
rid
honor.
of that? What do you do? Do you give them like a Xanax? What is the
No.
treatment for that?
You
Ice bag?
actually- I wish it was that simple. Sometimes you actually have to cut the penis to drain it.
Really?
Really.
Like with a needle or cut because the blood won't come out on its own. You
That's
can't
right.
coax the blood back.
No, it's not like coaxing a gal into the bedroom. No, it's harder than that. Pun unintended.
But so just getting distracting and telling them to think about baseball or something that won't make it. It's off on
it
its own at that
doesn't.
point.
If having an ER doctor walking in the room doesn't make it go down, nothing will.
What is wasn't Viagra discovered by accident or was it Botox? Botox was discovered as a headache medication, right?
A lot of things were discovered quite by accident.
What was Viagra's original intent was what? I've heard this at some point. I don't know what the medicine. It was a blood flow thing. But what Viagra does is it increases blood flow. It directs blood flow. What is the medical process? Doctor, do you know?
Oh, that's so funny. But why are we worrying about the medical process?
Well,
my friend?
I'm going to get to all this because I'm going to get like how much of these conditions and problems that people have sexually are physical, medical conditions, and how many are just psychological confidence communication
That's an
things?
excellent point, because I always say that sex is more between the ears than in the genitals. And a lot of it is lack of confidence. A lot of this is even biological. As you get older, you develop more blockages. It becomes a blood flow issue.
So if you have a poor diet, it affects the entire body.
It absolutely does.
Yeah, it's not that you will get heavy and unattractive. Things will stop shutting down. It's not a healthy internal system.
It's not a healthy internal system. In fact, heart disease and erectile dysfunction are absolutely connected, more than people think.
And I'm going to start with the men here. A lot of men are nervous around women from the time they're 13 years old. They're anxious. They're scared. They're frightened. Sometimes that leads to some rejection. Sometimes that manifests itself in anger. Sometimes that certainly affects the confidence. And all of those things eventually will trickle down to the bedroom, even when they do find a partner. They're worried she won't think, she's going to worry about how I'm performing. She will think less of me. I can't handle this. I'm worried about 100 different things. And that the body can shut down because of the mind overthinking things.
100%.
How do people get over that? How do you convince, before you get into like medical procedures and treatments, which we're going to get into in a second, you can't just tell a guy relax, right?
That's right.
And you can't tell him to just drink a little more, because that doesn't help things either.
Oh, that definitely hurts things.
So what's a guy to do? You can't just, it is a little easier for the woman, right?
It is. I hate to say it to women, because they're going to think I'm the enemy by saying this, What a traitor. But it is a lot harder for a man.
Again, no pun intended.
No pun intended.
Sometimes it's not.
Sometimes it's not.
Right.
But the thing is that a woman can lie there and fake it. A woman can have suboptimal function, and the man may never know. But when the man has a problem, she knows, or he knows.
Right.
It's embarrassing for the person who cannot perform.
Right.
Cannot get it up, cannot maintain it. There's a spectrum of erectile dysfunction.
Right. He can't fake it till he makes it, so to speak.
Correct.
He can't. Yeah, that is a bit of a problem.
There's no faking it.
Right.
He either has an erection or he doesn't. He can either last or he can't.
So somebody comes to you and they're like, I'm having trouble having sex, I'm having trouble performing. Do you first have to analyze if it's a psychological problem before you get into the physical?
I have to, because otherwise anything I do will fail. And then he'll look at me and be mad. She took my money and she did nothing for me. It comes down to that sometimes.
Where do you start? What is the question? I mean, you're not a therapist.
I'm not a therapist, but
You're
function
not your
as one.
psychologist. Right. You have to function as one. Where do you start to break down the barriers to figure out if it's something that you can provide a treatment for, or if it's just you need a hypnotist?
A hypnotist would be lovely. It would be a great adjunct to what I do. But since I don't have a hypnotist in the office, that's a fabulous idea, by the way. We should try that sometime.
Yeah.
We should do a show about this.
Yeah, hypnotist.
But the thing is that I have to somehow break down those barriers when they come in. It's not always easy, depending on the culture, depending on, if they consider themselves to be very macho. Those men are not going to be very honest right up front. There's a problem. When I explain to them that I can't help them unless they're honest with me, that it's not a woman talking to a man, it's just a doctor talking to her patient, then I think slowly but surely they start to let loose and they start to talk. And that conversation doesn't necessarily happen fully at the first visit. Sometimes I get just enough to know whether there's any point in proceeding.
Right.
And sometimes the true story, the extent of it, may come out on subsequent visits.
It's got to be harder for you as A, woman, B, an attractive woman. Like, that does matter. I think you kind of have to coax them into, you can trust me. You can, how do you get a guy to open up to essentially a stranger and kind of talk about his sexual issues when he probably can't even talk about that with his partner?
Well, humor helps. And kindness helps. So I'd like to
so
think
you can make a joke about it?
I have to make a joke about it. In fact, once I had a neighbor of mine text me and say that he was suffering from ED. It took a lot for him to say it. And then he said that he couldn't come to me because his wife was uncomfortable about me looking at his penis.
Right.
And I responded back, Tell her not to worry. I see more penises than